Welcome to our Transformation Outcomes webinar. The next 45 minutes, we're going to give you some concrete ideas on how to find the most expensive problems in your business to fix and to work on, the common pitfalls that people seem to fall for and cost them time and energy and money, and how to create a list of innovations to prioritize and then work on. And this is what we think of as a crawl, walk, run approach. We want to help you get your house in order so you can, get your, all the things that are costing you energy and time right now before you try to take on something really big and innovative and then just make your problems work. A question you might be asking is, why are there two companies here? And what we find is that, our approaches are really like laser focused on our niche that we own, and that together we can provide the kind of service that you might only find in like a giant, Accenture, BCG kind of company. So we hope we can get you some really kind of scrappy ideas you can use there. So let me introduce Mark here. I'm thrilled to be co-hosting today with a webinar with Mark Baldino, who's the co-founder of Fuzzy Math. He's a true leader in the UX design space. He's got over 25 years of experience helping lots of companies transform their digital products. His team at Fuzzy Math has worked on top clients like Microsoft and GE and KPMG, and have consistently delivered results that improve both user experience and their business outcomes.
Thanks, Mike. Super excited to be here and equally excited to kind of be co-hosting with you. So I'll introduce Mike LaVista, the CEO of Caxy. Mike's been really at the forefront of digital transformation for over 2 decades, guiding countless companies through complex, high-impact projects. And his ability to blend innovative technology with practical solutions has helped organizations like Motorola, Uptake, Tasty Trade, Wind Creek Casinos, streamline operations and boost efficiency. And so, as Mike said, 2 companies and why 2 people? Well, we think this is really a best of breed approach. Mike and I both come with our specific disciplines within our own organizations that we lead, but we really believe strongly that, great design requires great engineering, and products with great engineering, the converse is that they require great design. And both of those require great thinking and great strategy. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so Mike can talk about some of the successes and maybe a little bit of a quick failure that we've had over the years as we've partnered between Caxy and Fuzzy Math.
Yeah,
Mike?
We've worked together for over 15 years on and off. Really trust what each other's companies bring to the table, but that obviously doesn't stop bad things from happening. And so sometimes maybe it's best to hear about where things go wrong, because that's where you learn the most. And so, talking about a story we had, a client we had a long time ago, where ultimately what we were doing was kind of going the right direction, but a misalignment around need and like what the real problem was. And, that we had a process that kind of got misapplied. And so it's not the skill set or how we did it, but it's more about understanding the problem. So a lot of times, it's like, if you catch a cold, the worst thing you can do is go online and go look at WebMD, because you're going to come back with, melanomas and all kinds of crazy stuff, because that's not the problem. You're not good at finding the problem. So the better that we can, as experts in both engineering and user experience, help define what the real problem is, you'll be able to prioritize and come up with like the real thing that's that we should actually go work on. So if you're listening to this webinar, it's probably because you've thought to yourself, there's something going on at the company that just isn't right. Something doesn't work well. It takes too long. You're always hearing about, technology not quite working or failing, or people are copying, pasting things, or, from user experience point of view, things don't make sense, or people don't use stuff and they're using phantom spreadsheets to run the business. You're not unique. Many people have fallen on their faces trying to figure all this out. And what we believe is that we can save people a decade of fumbling around. Too many companies innovated just the one time, big bang, and then nothing happens. We find a lot of companies grow up with what we think of as like their original OS. We had these spreadsheets and now we have 50 spreadsheets, and customers see that original OS. And then the world grows up and Amazon's out there and people develop all these new expectations about things should be delivered right away. And I should be able to look anything up that I want. And you wake up and you're so far behind, whether it's with AI or, better, smarter tools, that they've outgrown what you've presented to them, and you've outgrown internally what you're using, and and other competitors have innovated new products. It's a long way to catch up. And in the past 20 years, we've helped, dozens and dozens, maybe it's hundreds of people just like you, to achieve new way of doing business, a new way of doing business. Importantly, how your people learn a new way of working, and giving customers a way to engage with you that's modern, removes all the friction from buying and engaging with you. And the story that comes to mind is like, you ever park somewhere and where you need to go, there's like a sidewalk, and it's like kind of a classic UX picture, but like people just cut through because I want to get from A to B. Like that's where we're trying to go. Nobody walks all the way around. Everyone's in that second group of like, plowing through and making their own cow path. And so, if you've ever done that, that's why we're here. We're talking about, imagining a world where, what you tried to do in the business from an operations and technology point of view was actually a straight path, finally. One of the things we have, an idea we carry around, is that bad systems ruin your good people. Like, we want to help you create things that allow you to run the business like effectively and efficiently. And the knowledge is probably already there.
100%. And it's hard to make something simple and effective. It's easy to overcomplicate things or to overthink. And to kind of solve these problems, you do need the two components that Mike and I are bringing to the conversation here, which is both design and engineering. When we think about design and discovery, is really helping understand user behavior, your internal users, maybe your customers. And what really early on in this discovery, you want to be problem hunters. You want to be looking for the problem or the source of the problem. Don't go to the solution. Don't pave that cow path. Don't put that sidewalk in place until you've actually spent time in your user's shoes, in your customer's shoes, in your employee's shoes. And it's easy to see why people sort of can cut corners. What you really want to do is sort of clarify the intent and translate that into a meaningful experience. But the other component of that is, if you can't actually pave, if you can't engineer your solution, you're sort of just left with a really, really good idea. So I think, Mike, from your perspective, is how do you take that good idea and actually implement that forward?
Right. And so, our plan here is the next 45 minutes, we're just going to teach you a few things, mostly around how to find those kinks in the hose. What are those really expensive problems that you're dealing with every day? And then, work through them, how to avoid the pitfalls that everyone falls into. And then finally, are there new ways of doing business that we can help you kind of create an innovation plan and move forward to implement them? You could pop.
All right, so the first thing we want to talk to you today is about how to find your most expensive bottlenecks. And as I mentioned a few seconds ago, early on, you really do need to force yourself to be Sherlock Holmes. You want to be a problem hunter, not a solution or a problem solver. And that's hard because I think people go to the solution right away. But, how often have you been in a room where someone has the answer? They walk into the room, they know the answer, they know the solution. Have they really studied the problem? And I've had a personal experience with a Fortune 500 client. They had an off-the-shelf ERP software that had problems, right? Don't want to say it didn't have problems. And they sort of stepped into the room with a mandate that they were going to build their own ERP without really looking at the kinks in the hose. And they hadn't spent time studying the actual problem. And so they invested 7 figures, including design, before realizing that sort of another homegrown solution would not work. And so that's a huge investment without spending time looking at being a problem hunter, as opposed to going right to a solution. And so I think working with companies in a bunch of different industries over the years, there's a few things that I've seen over and over again. Most companies have a series of processes that employees generally know. They built the paths that make you walk around the people that you sit there and live with. And as a CEO, you're really any manager saying to yourself, why aren't people just speaking up? Why aren't they going and talking to that person? And I found that hardly any of them do. But I'm sure 100% of the people here have all the processes documented, right? Of course not. Few of us do, even though we know there's a process we should follow. So I'm going to hand it over to Mike, who kind of cover how value stream mapping can be a solution.
Right. So where we put on our Sherlock Holmes hat is that with the one with the flaps, right? Like the whole, what is that called? That's like a hunter's cap, whatever. Someone in the comments will tell us what those are really called. So you get out your magnifying glass, but really with the value stream mapping, what we're looking at is sometimes, as Mark said, for the first time, we're going to map out how you create value in your process. And they're going to be value creating steps where it's like a unique thing that you do, and sort of like neutral value things like, we're entering things into a system. And then sometimes there's like value eroding things where we're doing things that are inefficient, or, we're having to call a customer back up for a number that we should have had in the first place. And what happens when you map out your entire value stream is that you start to see where the bottlenecks arise, because you're going to see things where it's like it enters a black box. And the Charlie's the only one in the whole company that knows how to do X. Or here's a place where, 4 arrows lead around because you're going to copy and paste something out of one system somewhere else. Or there's just a complete gap. We've worked with customers where there's a part of the process where they just live with it being insanely manual and inefficient because that's just how they've always done it, that kind of thing. And so, what we find is that most companies want to do kind of the hardest thing to grow, which is just increase their top line and just sell more. And it just exacerbates your problem. And so, the idea here is if we can have if we can figure out where the bumps and how we work, we're going to be able to iron those out so that you can. And so when I look at customers and where they usually get stuck, if we do this value stream map, you're going to see those things are going to jump right off the page. So thinking about how to do that, some concrete steps. So imagine if you get an internal champion or a consultant to come in and just follow you through your entire process. Get people from the department, because a lot of times they're going to have the ideas that they've been carrying around for years in industrial companies, sometimes decades. People that work there for 10, 20 years are like, well, for 20 years, I've had to walk across the floor to go get a handful of screws. And if they would just move that, bench 10 feet closer, I could probably do 20% more work, like those kind of ideas. But like involve the people. So we're gonna figure out from, pick a starting place in your value chain, from whether it's marketing or an orders place, and just follow it through step by step. And what you're going to find is that people are going to tell you where the problems are. The pitfall to avoid is a lot of times your internal experts are going to be more excited about the edge cases. They're going to love talking about, in an 80-20 scenario, they want to tell you about that 20 because that's where the cool stuff is. The 80 stuff is boring. Sadly, that's where you make all your money. So that's what we want to find out. We want to hear about the quotes take forever to do. Does the month close happen 6 weeks later? That's where we're going to dig into where those problems are. And now with your senior team, you can look at, where you're going to be able to circle on a visual map where the problems are and what it costs to live with that problem. Because sometimes you might uncover a problem that's like, God, this is really embarrassing and silly, but it just takes one full-time employee 4 hours a week to do. It's hugely scalable, but like you can live with it. Whereas something else is, we have this, huge error rate on our, transferring data from, thing X to thing Y. Let's work on that. So you're going to be able to see how to prioritize and rank vote based on like what the things are that are the most important. And those are the things you're going to have to go work on first.
Yeah. And I think your mission now is to really take those top three and document them. And for each, have the people involved in each of the steps, document how they do their steps, start high level, and then describe each input and output. And, if you look at those top three leaks, I bet you'll find a bunch of money, and you'll be kind of the personal hero that people are coming to as they make their way around the parking lot. It's really about prioritizing those leaks, finding them, and then prioritizing those, and then executing on how to get around them.
Yeah. And, thinking about, a client of ours that did this, this is honestly so common that you may find yourself in these shoes as well, that the whole company, $100 million company, is run off spreadsheets. And, there's a step, the problem is, so spreadsheets are great for people to start on because they're there, they're ready, they work. The problem is you can't put a process around it. So if someone doesn't fill out the cell or someone uses the old version with the old pricing, there's really no way to control that. And so this company, there's a step where someone, spent the whole day building a report that turned into a sheet for the next person so they could take a sheet and do something with the next thing. It was just constantly duplicating and sending around. And even worse, they had the pricing for their labor and their products built into like a tab on the sheet. And so if you were working off last month's sheet, your pricing was wrong. Or even worse, imagine this scenario. I'm working on a proposal for client X. So I just pull up the last time we sent them something 6 months ago, and I just copy that and work from there. Well, now you're 6 months out of date on that data. And so just like simply like putting a process in place around that, that's one of those expensive problems where how much does it cost you to quote a $500,000 job where, you're working on product pricing from 6 months ago? Just imagine that for yourself. That's where it really registered for me. Like there's actually a big opportunity here.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when people are looking at problems, it's easy to identify them, but they can't actually understand maybe what's the really root cause of that problem. And so a tip or a trick that we use with our clients that I think's been helpful for my clients is to kind of do 5 whys, which is to kind of start at what you think is the base problem, which is maybe that the chief product officer or CTO hasn't met their targets, and people are going, why? Well, they're facing challenges in achieving those objectives, and they think it's because there's a resource constraint. But then the next why is like, why is there a resource constraint? And then, okay, there's a resource constraint because the budget for hiring additional resources is limited. Well, why is there a budget limitation? So you keep asking why, and you say, oh, it's because the financial resources are allocated to other areas. And then it's finally like, okay, why are they allocated to other areas? Because there's a lack of prioritization. And so when you get to this 5th why, we started with somebody's not meeting their objectives, but what you're really understanding that there's a lack of prioritization by senior management. And that's kind of a root cause analysis. And I think that's one trick that can get you a little bit deeper into a problem and not just be stuck at this one sort of kink or bottleneck. You really got to continue to dive down and ask yourself these why 5 times until you get down to that root cause analysis.
So to kind of recap our first point here around how to find your expensive bottlenecks, leaving here from this webinar here in 45 minutes or whatever we have left now, you've got a plan for how to map everything out. You've got a plan about what kind of questions to ask and how to do 5 whys. And when you're done, you should probably have a prioritized list of the things that like, hey guys, listen, these are the things if we're going to focus on in the next quarter or the next year or whatever it's going to be. These are the things that we actually, if we fix them, this makes a big difference in the business.
Okay, so the second thing we want to talk to you about is common pitfalls in digital transformation. So we're just going to cover a few that Mike and I have run into over the years. The first is just to acknowledge that there's a challenge in legacy systems. They pose significant challenges internally, partially because there's outdated technology and architecture, also because people are used to using them. Maybe you're afraid that if we bend it a little bit, it's gonna break. But there's this risk that's associated to that of disrupting operational continuity and the difficulty in sort of managing the change among stakeholders, which Mike can talk about.
Yeah, so change management for me is like on kind of the unsung hero of the digital transformation, because what ends up happening is, like a lot of initiatives from management, you come up with this great idea. It looks really straightforward to implement and you put it out there and then nobody does it. So what we've seen really successful companies and transformations do is come up with, make sure you understand the why and what's in it for them, the situation for everyone down to line employees and temporary and contractors and everybody. Everyone should know why we're doing this, what's better about it, how it makes your life better. Because if you think about it, anything you come up with that has like a, now my job is harder, I'm really not going to do that. And I need to get you on board with this new way of doing it. Maybe scary because it's new, but it's better. And frankly, you were a part of it. Like you were involved in it. You had at least a voice in, as we were doing our value stream mapping, you got to say the thing about, hey, this thing has never worked for me in 10 years. And I've just kind of like, I thought that's how we did it, but now we have a chance to speak up. That works great. The other thing that I think that matters here about change management is a lesson that took me forever to learn in leadership is you can't say something once and expect that to stick. It's something you're going to have to, until you're kind of like breathless and blue in the face. Every time you're talking to the company, or it's in every message that we are moving forward and here's what we're doing and here's why it matters and here's how it impacts people. Because even think about the logistics of people, you leave and new people come in and they're in the middle of the transformation. Like they don't know what's going on. Like you have to talk about it all the time, because your champions are going to have to be those people that have been there 5, 10, sometimes 20 years, because this is actually better for us. So many transformations we've seen have stalled or failed because people just, go back to using, this new thing, we don't use it. It's, I have the spreadsheet I use to keep track of stuff because I don't know how this thing works. Like you really need buy-in. It has to be consistent and almost like boringly repetitive about how many times you talk about it. This has to be like what we're doing. And I think it's the Greek story about they sail the ships over and they land them on the beach and they burn the boats because we're staying here. This is what we're doing. We're going to win this battle.
I mean, I can't see everyone's heads that's watching this, but I imagine a lot of people are shaking their head around that exact same thing. We built this and now no one is using it. And I think part of it relates to another common pitfall, which is like, we have to do innovation with a big I, right? And it's got to be like this enormous sweeping change. Maybe you can do that, but actually you can kind of future-proof through incremental improvement. And if you want to future-proof your kind of business technology, it is replacing old systems, but also continuously sort of improving and updating new systems. And it's not just one pass and we're done with this, or we're doing this big overhaul change. It's like, let's plot a path that's incremental in terms of making changes within our organization and technology and processes. You don't want to go so far that you're not actually making those difficult decisions. As Mike said, you need to make the difficult decision to remove or get rid of a legacy piece of technology, but you can also do it incrementally. And sometimes the pitfall is that they try to do everything all at once and it fails.
Yeah. Another pitfall we see a lot is that when it comes time to like drive a part of the transformation, it really seems like the logical to do is put whoever sort of in charge of that department in charge of that transformation. So if you did your value stream mapping and you circled, the getting pricing together as a bottleneck for us. And so we put the head of sales in charge of that. That seems like the right person. What we've seen is What that person is a non-UX person, non-user experience person, not a product person, not really a tech person. What they end up doing is they end up building a sort of a cottage pet project for themselves, because that's the way that they think is how do I do this? And sometimes they're able to kind of extrapolate a little bit how others might use it. But we find that they'll end up building this incredibly niche edge case product that when other people come to use it, they're kind of scratching their heads like, well, that's not really the need, because they don't know how to go get the, user input. They don't know how to go get, they don't put their Sherlock Holmes hat on and go sleuth out like where the problems are. So to avoid that pitfall, I think it's really important to get someone, whether you hire them, you partner, or you bring in a consulting firm, someone who understands systems and user experience, who can help. Like that's the person to interview. That's the person you want to get input from, but they're not going to know what to do with the data that they get. And I say that because we've seen it time and time again. And another kind of related pitfall is, while you're doing that, a lot of companies that try to achieve what I think of as 100% coverage, meaning everything that everybody asks for goes in the product. And even just saying that out loud, you can imagine if you're building any other kind of product, building a car, you're building a monitor, you're building making a coffee cup, you can't include everything. You have to make some choices. And this idea that a lot of strategy is what you say no to. Come into this product, this transformation effort, thinking that there's going to be some guidelines about what we say no to, and we're really going to try to solve that 80-20. And then you could innovate later, maybe eventually get to 100, but plan on launching with 80 and you'll be a lot more successful.
Yeah. And that directly relates to another common pitfall. We try to do this 100% coverage. Part of it is because people don't define what success looks like for a digital transformation effort. They're enormous for organizations, right? Maybe multi-year efforts. But you need to have a North Star, a KPI. It doesn't matter what you call it. You have to know what success looks like. It has to be measurable at the start of their digital transformation. You have to be tracking towards that goal and communicating it to the entire team that's working on it. You have to, sort of achieve that metric at the end of the day. But if you don't define early on what success is going to look like for the organization with this digital transformation effort, you're going to run into a number of pitfalls.
Yeah. And again, these things all kind of tie into each other. Another related thing is that if you kind of embark on, especially software, you embark on looking at new software, whether it's ERP or a specialized quoting or scheduling or pricing or some other kind of system, if you don't have metrics about what you're trying to do with that system, what you'll do, and I'm guessing a lot of people, when I'm about to say this, can relate, you're going to end up with this graveyard of all these products you have that don't talk to each other and are underutilized. We were just at a client recently where their Salesforce spend was kind of astronomical, and they only use it for one thing. And even that was only being used by a few people, and they were spending like almost 7 figures on Salesforce for really no reason other than you have to have Salesforce, that kind of thing. And then that kind of goes down the line, like those things build up. So unless you've done the detective work to sleuth out, what are our problems? What are our metrics for success? Now go find software that fits you. So really be the, you're not just kind of, if you go out there and you settle for a thing, you're going to be disappointed. So really look at what's important about the software, for you to either buy or build, because we've been talking about both and not differentiating, but there are options. If you're buying something, use that 80-20 rule to make sure you solve the problem that you actually needed to solve. Or if you can't and it's worth it, that's when you make a decision to build something. So as we look at all these pitfalls, the reason we talk about it is if you don't invest in changing things, you don't invest in leading that change and support people, the risk is you're gonna spend money on something that ultimately fails and doesn't actually complete and do anything for the business. One of the stats that we pulled from a Gartner thing a few years ago, something like 72% of technology projects fail, whether they don't deliver the value they hope to deliver, or they just don't even finish. And the reason is because people don't do this groundwork. They don't set themselves up to succeed. They just start and hope for the best. That's just not going to work. So think about some concrete steps. We've given you a bunch of things to think about. But really the high level things to take away from here to be successful is do your homework. Think about change management as a key thing. Find experts who know how to do this thing and make some 80-20 strategy choices so that you'll be more successful and come out the other side. So when I think about, how this can impact your company, I'm thinking about, we had a client that was, doing a transformation, And he knew it was working because he was just in the cafeteria and an employee came up to him and they named it. And he asked him what was going on with the Acme Phoenix makeover. So like people knew about it, and it set an expectation that things were changing and what was happening. And, kind of sidebar, well, if he was asking about it, he probably could have communicated a little bit better. But the idea that it was out there, like there's a brand for this, meant that they had a better chance to succeed than a lot of things. Because again, there's a window of opportunity to do this. And it's really like the first week or two, like once the cat's out of the bag, it's really hard to keep doing it. But so set sail with this message and brand it and talk about it. And if you avoid this, it'll be at your own peril. All right, so the last thing we want to talk to you about today in this webinar is innovation. So we've talked about the crawl phase is to think about how do we, identify the actual things to go work on. The walk phase is let's make sure we don't trip over ourselves and actually get this done. And the run is, okay, now we've got some momentum. We can do some interesting things. And that's where innovation comes in. And making smart choices about innovation can be the difference between scaling that 5 or 10x and never get anywhere in the first place. And so that's an area that I think Mark's got a lot of cool things to talk about.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier the sort of innovation with a large I versus incremental changes. I don't think you should be scared if you're ready to tackle something pretty big. But one of the things that's worked well for our clients is another tool, which is customer journey mapping or user journey mapping. And we'll put a link to a template into the chat at the end here and send it to all attendees. But it's a simple exercise. It sort of maps out, similar to kind of customer value chain or value chain mapping. This is really looking at what are the steps in a process and who's involved. And you want to review this very simple, multiple swim lanes sort of format, but you want to use this kind of a specific lens, which is it's not all about finding pain and problem. There are things that your organization is doing well that you really want to maximize in your digital transformation moving forward. And so you want to find those areas and really put a circle around them and a highlight of, hey, this works well for us. And then you can kind of do a little bit of a pivot off of that one area into how do we maximize this? How do we increase this? And then the inverse or the other step is to look at areas where there isn't a lot of kind of a lot of value, or there isn't a lot of positivity. There are kind of gaps or things where you're maybe not making the most contribution, or you could actually find a little bit more value. And so just in the same way that you want to maximize things that are working well, where you find a gap, you want to sort of maybe try to plug that hole and pivot off of that, circle that area and say, what could we be doing? What more could we be doing at this point, which is kind of innovative. And just by mapping out your kind of user journey, process, tools, pain points, goals, and identifying those things that you want to maximize, what can you amplify here? Or what do you want to add? You're going to come up with a list pretty quickly in terms of ideas that you could enact. And that's a simple exercise that you can run with your team to start to generate that list. And lo and behold, folks, you're kind of doing innovation. It gets a bad name at certain organizations. Some people shy away from wanting to say they're part of the innovation or the innovation group, but it's something you should always be doing. Once you build one of these maps, you can always kind of go back to it. You can add to it. You can add a new part of the process. You can come up with a new set of ideas. And it's really about building that sort of cultural DNA of innovation.
That's great. And one of the areas that we also look, so if those ideas are all about what's happening in your customer journey, I think also looking at what customers are asking for, because maybe they're getting it elsewhere or you've seen elsewhere, those can be really important ideas. And I also think, I feel like in terms of ideation, I find a lot of clients tend to limit their search to just their market or their industry. And if you've been on, if you like the way that Instagram does commerce, or you like the way that Amazon does order history or whatever, and you're not in those businesses, that's a viable experience that you can pull over into your industry and perhaps be the first one to do it. So really use the world of experiences you're having, because I always like to think of customers moments before they were interacting with you, they were buying something off Walmart.com, or they were interacting with a friend on TikTok or whatever it is, pretending like I've been on TikTok, but still anything like that, like they've had those experiences. So use that your world of experiences. Because I think about, as an example here, we had a project with a client where an idea hiding in plain sight was that they were looking to find margin dollars by doing all kinds of other innovative stuff. And it became apparent looking at some of their sales history that some salespeople were a lot more successful in margin than others. And we looked at it, and lo and behold, they were just asking for more. And so what came out of the ideation session was that in something where we could bubble up the current market price, so to speak, within the company of what something's going for, we can increase our margin. We're really not doing anything more than just that. And so if making up a number, if people are accustomed to selling a part for $1, a piece to a certain customer, and they had a new job coming up and they just took the old price and copied the proposal and redid it. But meanwhile, out of 100 reps in the company, 10 or 15 of them are charging $1.20 and it's going through just fine. Turns out that's the market for that. Then that's just free money. That's 20% of free margin dollars right there. So those kinds of, and then, we built a system to kind of surface that data so that you had a little bit more confidence. Because honestly, as salespeople, a lot of times you're kind of just, putting the finger on the wind and taking a guess at what pricing is going to be, or just loading up that last invoice. Well, here's a way to find margin without even having to do anything really technologically, honestly. So those kind of things I think are really interesting ways to do that.
So one example of kind of doing a user customer journey map that we were doing kind of for accounting software. So it's internal accounting software, but also has client access as well. And so one of the big, maybe a small I innovative ideas was hooking this into sort of electronic filing, right? Seems very straightforward. It was a customer expectation. So it's an area where you're sort of like, when we add this, we're going to be adding incremental value, but it's important. We're doing it through another series of tools, but we want to pull it into our own application. And then there was sort of a light bulb moment as we were looking for that, because that provides a lot of value for the customer, that they can go in and they can digitally signature, e-file, everything's all in one place. But from a sort of a business perspective, there's always this lag between that signature and invoicing and getting paid. And so the actual maximize for business value perspective was to link those two together, which was to put some tips into the application and some hints that invoicing was going to be part of the experience, and post sort of digital signature and send off, you're going to be presented with your invoice. And then they were going to start taking, digital payment. So it's really kind of collapsing that payment cycle down. And so it's a win-win. It's a benefit to the customer because they're getting a much smoother transaction, digital signature and exchanging of information. And it's a win to our client, which is to have sort of invoicing and billing capability within the software. And so there's sort of a dual application of kind of a important part of the journey. So a pretty clear example of when we mapped it out, we sort of realized we could take these two things and kind of combine them. And there's a win-win in terms of amplification of value that could be provided by the platform.
And as you were talking, I'm thinking of another sort of the next step beyond crawl, walk, run would be sprint. And one of the things that, as I think about that transformation efforts can deliver on is maybe a new way of doing business, and in a kind of maybe in a small way, but in a way that matters for your valuation and other things. Can your business become a subscription business? Do people buy products that they used to, there's a part of your business where, things that have to be ordered monthly or quarterly? Switching those kind of businesses can change, a lot of your predictive analytics, that kind of thing. And we've had a number of clients take things that they know about the market or they know about their sector and the business, turn it into a SaaS product. We've had people take a, thing we built as a scheduling system for contractors and product, and kind of being able to be agile about how to make changes about that. They couldn't find anything online that did that, so they made one, and now they're starting to sell it to people, and maybe that's the business. And I was talking to a print firm the other day, and print is still pretty viable, but you probably want to hedge your bets, and so I ended up creating a platform that is sort of a way for people to, within a brand, for customized marketing around the country, localized to Albuquerque and Philadelphia, but within a system. And now maybe they don't need to handle the printing. Maybe the real value is that product. And so if you're doing your printing in Florida, that's fine. It'll just export to the Florida vendor. So there may be things that about the industry that you could create a product for that might change your business, might be a new line of business, a new division, a spinoff, those kinds of things. And again, thinking about it, what we've talked about today, it's kind of a, you want to get your house in order, you want to be successful. But as we get to the innovation, I think innovation is where the top line excitement can happen, because now you have something that are just totally different. And, for this, with the innovation side, the reason that we're talking about that now is, especially in technology, things heat up and change so quickly. In the last year, we went from not knowing what an LLM is to everyone using ChatGPT to write, some marketing copy and innovate ideas and come up with things and that the pace of change there will continue to increase. And so making a stand on innovation sooner just means the risk of falling too far behind competitors or someone new showing up and instantly being like a problem. This is how you mitigate that problem. And so kind of thinking about those concrete steps on what to do. Mark gave you some really good ideas on how to look at that, the user journey mapping to see like, what are things that we're doing well that we can maximize, and are there gaps that we can, we can improve on, and maybe there's things from customers and the market we can steal from. And then lastly, do we know something about the market that we can create a product about? That's where the real interesting thing's gonna happen.
All right. So, well, we've been talking about some sort of common problems and problem identification, being problem hunters, finding those really, really kind of important kinks in the hose. We also discussed what are some common pitfalls that people fall into as part of their digital transformation processes. And then we just covered innovation, how not to make it scary, how to integrate it into your kind of the DNA of your company, and what are some really concrete ways you can innovate. And so one of the questions Mike and I get a lot is, do you work with people like me? And the answer is yes. Mike and I both work with folks like yourself. And what we would like to suggest you do is head to transformationoutcomes.com. We'll put a link in the chat here. And as part of that, if you'll go and sign up, we're offering a few things. The first is 2 templates. We talked a lot about value stream mapping. We talked about journey mapping. Mike and I are going to provide 2 templates that you could start using today or tomorrow within your organization to help do value stream mapping and journey mapping, and do that problem identification, and also some of that, ideas around where you can innovate. And we also are going to offer anyone that signs up a free 1-hour assessment. So that's going to be an hour with Mike and I, where we're going to run you through a formal assessment of your organization and provide some areas for improvement.
And, don't worry, like this isn't $100,000 investment. This is something we think we can provide some value pretty quickly for you, and help you find a path forward and kind of achieve that dream that you've been kind of struggling to achieve perhaps. And we want you to picture a day when, it's not so annoying to get up in the morning and look at the business and try to get through the day. And you're picture a day when you don't have to listen to the complaints about how things work or don't work. And, picture a day when like you get to do whatever you want with your time, and maybe this is we scale it and help you exit. Like this is kind of the thin, you see that picture of the guy, like, hammering away through the, he's digging a hole through the mountain there, and he quits when he's like 1 foot away. Like that's how close some of the stuff is sometimes. And I'll leave you this. A long time ago, both my kids played football as kids, and still. And we made this commitment to get up in the morning and go play catch. And I remember hearing my alarm go off, and I snoozed it. And we all have the snooze bar on the phone. And went off again and snoozed it. Went off again and snoozed it. And the third time I snoozed it, I looked over, and he was standing right there next to me like this. And he was ready to go. And I urge you to not hit the snooze button. This is one of those things that, like we said, it could be pretty painless to at least find out was there a big lever in the business that you can, put into place and really move things? Because the cost of inaction could be pretty big. And we think we're here to help you. And we'd love that you join us today. And I hope you'll join us again on Transformation Outcomes.